Okay, so I would take a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes for the October 24th, 2018 as presented, barring any errors or omissions. Valley, second. Maddie? I was just wondering why Kate just wouldn't raise her hand. She wanted to point to you. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So Mara's going to abstain because she wasn't here at that last board meeting. All right, adjustments to the agenda. I believe the only adjustment right now under number 10, board comments and committee reports, we have NA, but we are going to talk about the MSMA conference in that spot this evening. So other than
as a National Merit Scholar. So we are incredibly proud of these students. They have showed commitment, dedication, and perseverance for their academics at their time at Freeport High School.
Are you going to say something first? You're going to say something first?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. The first and Margaret Parada.
I should have mentioned that half of them are at rehearsal for the play, which is tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name's Craig Sickles. I'm the athletic administrator, and We had a very exciting fall. The first person we'd like to recognize is a young man who, at the Western Maine Conference Cross Country trophy, but it was a historic season. Very proud to be associated with this group of young men, so congratulations to the boys soccer team.
I apologize in advance if I say your name incorrectly. I'm sorry. Bill Anton. Caleb Arsenal. Caleb Barrett. Jesse Bennell. I knew who that was. I was like, what's he doing? Okay. Damon Butler. Alex Case. Jason D'Amico. Joey Driscoll. Jake Dumont. Wes Goodwin. Liam Gould, excuse me. Liam Grogan. Owen Howarth. Griffin Johnson. Sam Larichelle. Owen Patrick. Atticus Patrick. Ethan Prescott. Aaron Rizicki. Jacob Celian. Erickson Shea. Cameron Strong. Sam Tarini. Shay Wagner. Gabe Wagner. And Will Winter.
Boys soccer NPA South Regional Champions. That's what these ones are.
I guess I would like to just add that, you know, no season has a winning season without some great coaches, so I really want to thank the coaching staff. So thank you, coaches.
We should have certificates for them.
Okay, maybe we'll start that.
Okay, so having been to a couple of those home games, they were pretty amazing. So if anybody didn't get to see a game under the lights, highly recommend it for next year. My child was awestruck, so super fun. All right, good news and recognition. Report from the board rep? No. So we'll move on to good news from Freeport Middle School. Mr. Grogan.
I just want to remind everyone that the musical opens on Thursday night at 7 p.m., Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and then Sunday at 2, because I'm sure that Clay would have said that.
And that's the high school, at the high school.
Freeport Performing Arts Center.
Because Durham's play is also tomorrow and Friday night, The Wizard of Oz. So if you're up for a variety of plays this weekend, you have
Double feature.
choices.
What time are Durham shows?
They are 6:30, Thursday and Friday. Is that right, Will? 6:30? Okay.
So I did come in this afternoon and make sure the computer was up and running with the hard wire. And
And I can attest that he made a kind of a PowerPoint. He was showing it to me, so, you know.
which I have nothing. I'm
Right.
just pretending.
Right.
I can go by AirPlay, I guess.
When it go to the reports? Oh, no.
We're going to try AirPlay. Okay. So what I did do is I just kind of thought of what's happened at the middle school in the last 30 days, just to give you kind of a quick snapshot of all the things besides just your traditional learning that is going on here at the middle school. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go through what has happened here in the last 30 days. Sixth graders went to Kiev. In the mornings, we've been doing a ton of different advisory activities with the kids. Red Ribbon Week is a week that we promoted, drug-free lifestyles, and that's all of our kids out on the field with a drone taking their picture, wearing red in shape of a ribbon. We had a professional trumpet player come work with our brass class with Mrs. York. STEM, they are making the clock project now with the kids, where they'll create that in the computer, then have a machine help create that with them. They do the design work with that. We had our play auditions this past week, and they started reading their scripts today. Sixth grade, we added a new learnings area for the kids out in the middle of the locker bay for two reasons. One, it's a great space to use, and two, we needed more space. Science field work, the kids out looking for invasive species out in our area. Space Camp has kicked off this year with our sixth graders. This is the CAD house design that they finished up a little while ago. The Science Club building rockets, and they had a whole bunch of scientists come in with their rocket building project. Community service projects, different kids doing different things. The kids are planting trees to help reduce the sound from the highway on our athletic fields. Our sixth graders this week are going to the Gulf of Maine Institute. Seventh graders, half of them went to Salem last week, half are going tomorrow. Spirit Series is a Reader's Theater project we do with our kids. Free Speech Week is something that our kids worked on in 8th grade and what that is about. 8th graders created the roller coaster project. Maine Invasive Species Summit, where we had a whole bunch of professionals come in and talk to our kids about invasive species, what they are and their impact on our environment. Writing Club, writing with the Historical Society, our writing club, and our 8th grade kids that want to be part of the honors program at the high school went down to the Historical Society to do a writing project with them. Ropes coursework we've done with our 8th graders, getting them out on the course during their flex time. A trip to the escape room. Lions Club piece poster they did through the art club. Anime and Art Club had a character drawing workshop where they brought in a professional artist to work with them on that. A group of kids in the 8th grade are working on the C-SPAN student film contest, talking about the Constitution and rights. Author Dan Gebbenhart visited our school and met with our kids and talked to them. Wolf's Neck State Park for science exploration in the 7th grade. Our JMG program hosted a blood drive at our school. Board game club after school. New York City drama field trip. They went down and saw a play on Broadway. Baking activities. And that is a quick snapshot of what's kind of happened outside of the classroom the last 30 days at the middle school. Okay. Any questions?
What was the 7th slide?
That was the one about needing bigger tables, bigger budget, and a flag.
The flag. Thank you, Ray. Public comment. So if anyone's interested, we just ask that you come up to the microphone so everyone can hear you. Just let us know your name, what town you're from, and anything you'd like to share in 3 minutes or less. Okay. Let's see. Reports from the superintendent.
Yes, I just have 3 resignations to report this evening. Hannah Hebert, who's an ed tech, Danny Vinci, our OT, and Margaret Dorsey, who has been with us quite a while in our HR department doing our accounts payable, will be retiring as of December the 14th.
She always gives me my pen to sign warrants. Okay, so that's it for?
That's it.
Okay. Administrative reports, we're going to start off with Will Pidden for the Durham Community School Goal Review. So I'm just going to throw this out there to everybody who's doing their presentation tonight. I was thinking as I was reading through this stuff in preparation for this evening that there are some acronyms in there, and we do have a new board member. So if you do come across an acronym, feel free to share with us what it stands for.
Yeah. That would assume that we could recognize an acronym when we saw one. It was surrounded by them. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see that, but my understanding is you all have a written copy anyway, right? So I kind of scroll through. I'm not sure if anybody on that side is going to be looking up anyway. But so we are doing a 2-year process, which you may remember from last year. The work we've been doing has been focused around feedback and sort of the broader understanding of what feedback implies or infers relative to impacting student learning. So the goal of this 2-year goal is to improve the effectiveness of feedback from both teachers and peers to increase student achievement across content areas. One of the pieces, I think I've said this before with goal setting, is that whilst we enter into it by writing an action plan, which we believe is the way to go, once one starts the work, if you actually knew how to do it right from the beginning, it really wouldn't be a goal, it would be a to-do list. It's just something you've never got around to. So when there's new learning involved, oftentimes the new learning takes you into slightly different directions or has a different impact than you'd anticipated when you sort of drafted it out. And we certainly found that last year with our work around the feedback goal and also sort of how that informed our work moving forward. The other piece I want to just sort of touch upon a little bit, and I'm not sure familiarity with the two terms of technical change and adaptive change. So they are sort of integral aspects of the work we do. Technical change is the easiest of the two. It often is just about creating something or doing something. So for example, if you said, we want to have students reading 30 minutes a day, you can make a gap in the schedule, say this is when we're going to be reading, and then you can say we're all now reading. So that would be a technical change. If part of that was you were saying we want to develop a culture for reading and that students love and are passionate about reading at school, the technical aspect to that might have been around creating that 30-minute block. The adaptive part is far more complicated and time-consuming. It may be around how is that being modeled, how is that embraced, what is it that adults are doing or students are doing that really make that come to life in terms of anybody new coming into that environment would recognize, wow, there's a strong reading culture here. That adaptive change, it's time-consuming, but it's also less concrete in how one gets there. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of follow-up. I'd give you an example closer to home, perhaps for us, which we're still working at, is a few years ago our goal had been around accountable talk, and the skills involved for students to push their thinking and the collective thinking of the group in terms of how they dialogue with each other in terms of learning within the classroom. So again, the technical change was quite easy. We teach specific sentence starters, I agree with, I wonder about, but the adaptive change so that it can happen when students are just working together as opposed to under the direction of the adult is a slower process. And we're still in the midst of that 3 years later in terms of how that continues to become an adaptive change. The reason I give you that definition is that this is a goal that we're very much going through the technical side of it and working towards the adaptive part of it. So it is not something that I think we'll be able to check off at the end of the year and say, there we go, we have cracked the feedback goal. But let me share a little bit more about what our learning was through the last year. Some of the pieces you'll see on that reflection that I had provided you with, you'll notice that across different grade spans, students and teachers, or teachers predominantly, had done through some of those technical changes. So in pre-K 2, an emphasis on creation of student-facing rubrics. So student-facing meaning the language is very much developmentally appropriate for the learner. So a rubric that might be for a first grader would look different from a fifth grader, for example. And it's not something that a teacher should have to interpret. It's something that a child should be able to have agency and control over. So student-facing rubrics that help define learning intentions and clarity about success criteria, individualized goals. The teams explored and utilized progressions in writing, reading, and science, again, to be able to show what learning looks like, what success criteria looks like. The 5th through 8th grade range was more about, again, student-facing rubrics, exemplars, and progressions, defining success, and then providing timely feedback and opportunity for students to look at their work relative to success criteria. Across the school, we worked collaboratively to deepen our understanding of aspects of this feedback model. So some of our key learnings from this, as we'd come into this work, we'd share with you the idea, and you'll see it now throughout the district, around sort of the basis of this work around feedback, that there's clear learning outcomes. What will success look like? That then the learner knows where they are relative to success, and then that third strand is, and then they have concrete steps on how to get closer to success. The first two were relatively easy. Success criteria, we're pretty good at. Understanding where students are, being able to communicate to them where they are relative to success, again, that's pretty much in the domain of what we do in terms of whether it be from assessment, these rubrics, progressions, etc. The piece that really became new learning, which it sounds almost crazy to say, but an awareness, if you like, was what those next steps are for the variety of different learner to get closer to success. And within that reflection, you'll see I sort of bolded those. We sort of in essence, had come to see this as a formula, that content knowledge was this sort of the key to being able to give that really clear next step for a learner. And whilst it may sound obvious that someone with a graduate degree should have a better understanding of math than someone who's perhaps in 6th grade, they do. They can do the work. But the diagnostic side of being able to say, out of these 40 learners that I'm working with, this is what I think she needs, this is what I think he needs. That is the piece where, for the most part, we're good. But there's definitely students where we get stuck. And so this notion around you have to have deep content knowledge or the capacity to recognize where a child is at to move forward. That became this sort of formula for us, that clear success criteria and learning intentions plus content knowledge equals confidence and ability to give next step feedback. So that was, an exercise we had done with staff was around if you could choose feedback that you would give to somebody, choose the content for it and who that receiver of that information would be. It was really interesting that most people chose something that they felt absolutely expert in, and that the person they would give that feedback to would be someone who's not quite as expert, obviously. But that confidence level is important. So then, through the work we were then doing, and some additional reading and training and professional development we've been working through, there were two other factors that really came to the fore that are above and beyond those three sort of steps that we had gone into this work envisioning. And one of those is the necessity for a culture for feedback. Again, it sounds quite obvious, but when you start to actually then examine your culture and say, all right, is there a culture for feedback? What does that look like? How receptive are people? What is that growth mindset? How pervasive is that within the work? So then it came up with, in essence, another formula, this idea that confidence and ability to give next step feedback plus a culture for feedback equals student growth from feedback. So the learning that we had really come through was this culture for feedback is a necessity, and also the sort of confidence on what that next step piece is. So it's not just superficial. I mentioned there was two additional pieces, and that other piece that really has come across is the importance of recognizing student feedback to the teacher and the importance of then acting upon it. So the other part that has shifted from last year's goal to this year's goal is that additional piece around student feedback to teachers, which happens all day, every day, right? So the manner in which students are behaving is clearly is feedback. The manner in which they respond to questioning, or the manner in which they talk to each other, maybe on an assessment that you have, and you're looking at how that learning has gone, what sort of results they have. All this is feedback to the teacher. And ensuring that we have a culture for feedback, that we're responsive to that we're recognizing what that feedback is, and then in that same manner, how do we act upon that? So teaching teams working around recognizing student feedback and, in essence, being responsive to it. It's a crucial component that has to live in a culture for feedback for the adults as much as the students, because more often than not, really having to lean in with teammates and say, this is what I'm seeing, or this is what I'm learning from my students right now. What steps do you think would be helpful here, or how did you approach that? So those are the kind of the additional pieces that we sort of learned through last year. So as we move forward into this year's goal, the aspects of the goal that stay the same are still the same outcome, which is to improve the effectiveness of feedback from both teachers and peers to increase student achievement across content areas. You'll see some steps there. Again, they're best intention steps as we continue to work through the year. I don't doubt that some of them will morph or become more pertinent or relevant than others. One of the pieces that we had recognized last year when we got further and further into the work was that our initial idea of how we were going to sort of determine progress had been around identifying target students to focus on and establishing baseline data to see their growth. What we felt was, as we went into this work, that we could do that, but it wasn't going to necessarily provide us with necessarily helpful information. We weren't far enough along with our own development of practices. We still intend that to be the method for us to ascertain our own improvement on this. So the outcomes for this year, there's several teacher outcomes, which I'll explain. Teachers demonstrate increased content knowledge about effective feedback practices. Teachers develop and sustain a culture for feedback within their classrooms, I should say across the school. Teachers receive feedback from their students, colleagues, and through self-reflection. And teachers apply what's been learned through feedback to their practices in increasingly effective and diverse ways. We anticipate measuring this through the mini observations that we conduct as part of our professional growth and professional evaluation model, also from teacher reflections and feedback, and then bringing back last year's measure, but from a slightly different perspective. So we're looking at using student growth on classroom-based performance assessments. This will be from the classrooms of our teachers on the school leadership team, because our leadership team is made up from representation across the grade spans. So we have kindergarten through 8th grade teachers represented. We have special education, phys ed, we have Spanish, and that range we think will give us a sense across the different grade levels and across the different kind of content areas. Maura had asked a question ahead of time. Thank you for sending that ahead. That really gave us an opportunity just to get a sense of what your question was. Her question had been asked if we could give a little more detail around what type of growth could I describe the student growth measure a little further? And was it specific to feedback? So what we're anticipating here is it be more from their academic performance. So in terms of the teachers will be looking at, within the classrooms we'd anticipated, for example, their math open responses or writing assignments, and looking at how responsive students have, or what changes or what growth had come about in their practices through the year based on those sort of measures. And we were thinking those measures because they happen throughout the year. There's math open responses through each of the math units, and the writing progressions continue through Writers' Workshop throughout the year. So it would give us some longitudinal sort of opportunity to look at. The in Spanish, it was more around sort of speaking and listening, and then and then another question you'd had, which I knew it was related to this too, was, are there outcomes for peers and students as well? We weren't looking for outcomes from peers and students at this point other than growth in terms of feedback to us. At this point within this work, we're very much looking for our practices and the culture of feedback. So certainly one could look at, are there some measures we can look at to see what kind of culture there is, but I think we're going to see that through the responsiveness, hopefully, within student work at the classroom level through the other performances. So that's the gist. That's the gist. You want to hear the full story? And what I want to just add on a piece that Valley, when we had met previously at a PBE meeting, Becky was sharing some feedback from the presentation we had made, and you know, I want to convey that when I'm describing here, this is not, you know, as a school, we're not all on the same level. We have some teachers who are very far along with this work right now, and we have some teachers who are not as far along with this work right now. So our goal with this is to raise the level of everybody, to, in essence, have that scenario where a student attending Durham Community School would get the same experience relative to a culture of feedback and the kind of interaction they have with their teacher, regardless of which teacher they have. So that's always the work we look at with professional development. And so we are in a wide range of this right now, but building sort of common understanding and common practices. Having said that, does anybody have any other questions
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you to follow up a little bit on the student outcomes. You said you're not measuring them right now, but eventually, what would those outcomes be?
Well, student outcomes would be, obviously right. So obviously the goal here is to increase student achievement. But if we were to then look at, if we were looking at students to provide us feedback around this work, then I think the positive feedback we would be looking for is responsiveness to feedback, which really is around sort of growth mindset and seeing the sort of inquisitiveness and questioning being a part of that culture in the classroom. I would say, from the work we've done when we talk about reassessment at our previous meeting in Pownell, and I think I mentioned at the time, we still are struggling sometimes to have our students who are perhaps less academically successful to push on. We have kids at the upper level who push themselves, but having that be a culture around sort of, and again, I'm going to bring back to growth mindset, that they can be successful students, and having that be pervasive throughout the school. That to me would be something we would be looking at, that responsiveness and that sort of belief, that sort of growth mindset around work.
So this is a 2-year goal.
Yep.
At the end of this year, are you envisioning all of your staff to be up at the same level as your leadership team, or are you thinking like this is really like maybe 3 or 5 years?
I would, yes. I know. So I'm gonna, that's why I bring it back to technical and adaptive, right? The technical change we will have because it's the easy work. So in terms of the technical change, it will be those pieces around that you see, those statements. They're much more technical in nature, right? That teachers demonstrate increased content knowledge about effective practices. I mean, really, you could probably give them a book to read and come in and they'd have that. But it's teachers receiving feedback from students and colleagues through self-reflection, teachers applying what has been learned through feedback to their practice in increasingly effective and diverse ways. Those are more adaptive changes. So I think this goal, in terms of its initial work, will be concluded this year, but all our goals are ongoing. So as I mentioned at the beginning, our accountable talk goal is still ongoing because it's that work that as you start to sort of pressure test new learning is when it really shows where the misunderstandings were or the weaknesses were or the misinterpretations, and they still have to be fixed up. And so they're ongoing learning. So I would say that we'd have the technical side, we should have everybody out where the leadership team is. The adaptive side is a multi-year process, if that makes sense.
I want to thank you for that explanation, and given that you have recognized as a team that it's the culture that you're wanting to change, that you've given it the time. I think so often, not just in schools, but in any organization, we think, oh, we got a problem with culture, and we want to switch it like that. And it's just not possible because we're human beings, and we are always operating at different levels. So thank you for recognizing it and explaining it so thoroughly. And so I'm assuming that regardless of where you are at the end of this year, the goal may become something else. But like you just explained, this will be now more part of your culture.
Right, and it will still require ongoing support and PD and sort of nurturing so that it doesn't sort of get lost. But yes, it will be, I foresee this as being multi-year work. I'm just not assuming you're going to want to hear about it more than twice. Yes, I'll be happy to tell you. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Freeport Middle School, Mr. Grogan again.
So last year, our goal as a building was to implement procedures to increase our habits of work practices in the school and in the classroom. And you know, really worked hard on that, over the past couple of years, and we'll continue working on that this year. As Will said, just because you're done the goal doesn't mean you're done, working on that as a school. Sitting in a team meeting today, we were talking about, how we're going to, do this in the self-assessments around habits of work in the sixth grade team meeting. So it's always a discussion, always something we're looking to get better at with this. What we were looking to kind of evaluate how we were doing with this, we looked at can kids truly go into Power School and check their own grades within that. And when we surveyed the kids multiple times throughout the year, by the end of the year, our surveys were at 96%, and the last one was at 100% of all of the kids, were able to find and access and understand how the habits of work were doing with that when we trained them, when we surveyed them with that. The things that we did last year, I'm just going to go through this quickly. Habits of work were moved above content grades in Power School, and the goal of that was to hopefully give it greater importance so that the kids and parents would realize that the habits of work are truly important to their kid moving on, that it's not just the content understanding, but how they're doing in school, the habits of work are equally or sometimes more important, for them being able to move forward. So that was a, kind of a technical change that we made moving forward. Scoring criteria was created for all habits of work standards in the school. Teachers and students do modify them to fit their classes. An example of that would be I had the preparedness and engagement habits of work scoring criteria, and I sat down with my advisory and I said, what does it mean to be prepared in this advisory when you walk in? And we determined that you needed to have your planner, you needed to have your orange folder, you needed to have your reading book when you come in to be prepared. So that's what it specifically means, as opposed to in a science class, that's going to mean something different coming in prepared. So that's something we created with our students with that in there. Last year, we did email out to the parents multiple times throughout the year and sent out paper home copies to them, paper copies of the report cards. We made multiple YouTube videos for parents to explain to them how to check the grades on Power School. We did begin to have athletic eligibility based on preparedness habits of work. This is something that is still a work in progress, and we are working on improving. We did it the first first season in this fall, and we found that it was really kind of a little bit unmanageable for the parents, and how, we're not changing the criteria for the kids, but how we monitor it, structurally from within the school. We're going to try something different in there to make it more manageable for the teachers and administrators. So that's still a work in progress on how we monitor that with that. Life Touch created habits of work posters for all our classrooms. There's one on the wall here, I noticed as I walked in. We did have RTI classes, guidance, ed tech, special ed teachers, classroom teachers provide extra habits of work support as needed. Those people also gave direct training to teachers as needed for that. And we are continuing to work on improving Power School this year. The quick lookup page, as we presented at the last school board meeting, looks different, where you can clearly look at the difference between the habits of work and the content grade on the quick lookup screen when you log in as a parent. We continue to communicate with parents and students about checking Power School and grades. We've made another YouTube video with the changes on it and emailed it out to parents. Beginning discussions with teachers about focusing the habits of work skills that we are assessing are truly skills that will help them improve their content learning within the subject area. Working on self-assessing. That was one of the conversations we had in the sixth grade team today about having the kids, because one of the comments was the kid says, you gave me this grade. And then the other teacher said, well, if you have them self-assess, you're not giving them the grade. You can give them feedback on their self-assessment and work with them on that, which led to a great conversation about self-assessment, and a bunch of teachers were sharing the self-assessing rubrics they were using. Students and teachers creating rubrics together, and eligibility criteria and monitoring is something that's continually an ongoing work in progress for us. And then on to this year's goals. This year's goals look a little bit different. We have goals by departments. For our English language arts goal, we're really going to look at comprehension skills for all students. To improve the comprehension skills, we are going to look deeper at some readings and around issues of social fairness and social justice. We are going to really focus on student discourse within the classroom and discussing those. And the Teachers College that you've heard a ton about in the K-5 level, the materials that they provided at the middle school has not been to the same level that the K-5 has been. And now they have 3 units for both reading and writing for the middle schools that we will be doing at both schools in reading and writing. So we are working on implementing 3 of those in each grade level. In math, we are, the focus is really going to be, and this is a district goal as well, all units of instruction are taught. The learning targets are clearly visible when you walk into the room so the kids know what's expected of them. Consistent use of scoring criteria on summative assessment, increase exploration activity, and really promote the mathematical discourse. On the picture of the slide, when I showed the 6th grade learning area, that was a group of kids out there talking about what was going on in their problems with that. For social studies, once again, looking at increased reading comprehension skills, is the textbooks that, you know, they aren't the primary source of what we use, but they kind of the backbone of what we pull a lot of stuff from. And those are written, you know, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level. The reality is any, you know, 7th grade classroom is going to have kids in there from 3rd grade through 10th, 11th grade reading levels. You know, you can scaffold and modify those to some degree to help those, but you do have to have truly challenging materials for higher and, you know, lower level reading materials so they can access the curriculum as well. So that's something the social studies teachers are working on, is to provide more resources and have, you know, for the different units that we teach. And then the science, really looking at the classroom management and distracting student behaviors to hopefully increase the amount of on-task behaviors, that the on-task learning behaviors that we see from students. And this will be, you know, talking about the essential learnings of every lesson, being on there, teachers talking about the workflow and management. We're going to be talking about classroom management strategies. And, you know, really the way we're going to look at that is, do our test scores go up? We think if we can have them more engaged and more on task, that, you know, our test scores will go up. And for all of these goals, they're going to be based on NWEA or MEA scores. Okay. Questions?
Laura.
Thank you. For the overall math goal, is it to focus learning in the different areas, or in the different areas that you described? I just was a little unclear on the overall
So
goal.
so we are in year 2 of a new math curriculum. So last year we started with the Big Ideas math program in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and now we are doing it in 6th grade through 10th grade. So it's really we're still getting used to that curriculum, and that's something the district math committee actually made that goal, that consists of teachers, it consists of Cynthia, Becky, myself, the math coaches. And it's really making sure that, you know, we're pacing and getting through everything. And we really want there to be a lot of mathematical discussion, problem solving, and hands-on activities within that thing, as opposed to kind of the drill and kill part of math that we grew up with. So that's really the mathematical practices that we're focusing on.
Kate.
I was just looking at the ELA goal and the strategies and action steps for deepening the level of comprehension skills for students. Bullet number 1, I just had a question, what the last part of that, how that's integrated. Make decisions related to issues of fairness and social justice. How does that, how do you work that into ELA?
So that will be, and that is actually a part of the district ELA goal as well, that we are adapting here at the middle school. So that was kind of, that language comes from beyond our teachers. Our teachers were part of it, and you really like that idea. But it's really bringing those into, bring readings around those topics into the classroom, because if it's highly engaging, hopefully they will be reading it more and engage more and work on their reading on that side. And I think Cynthia and Becky were also part of it, so I don't think there's other things that you can add into that, but I think it's really those topics coming into the language arts classroom more.
So what kind of topics are we talking about here? I guess I'm not, it's just really a broad subject.
is.
So I'm not really understanding what kind of, is it brought in through textbook, or not textbooks, but texts?
I mean,
Like-
it definitely can be through, like, all of the units are not textbooks. We don't have an anthology where we're reading through. Like the 8th grade, does a civil rights unit, where they look at that. So there's a wide variety of texts that they will bring into that. And even, when we look at, issues in the other subjects that we do with the 30s unit, there's still issues of fairness, when we look at that. So it's a lot of that. It's, it's conversations around that. It's reading around that. And I think probably the civil rights would be one of our better illustrations of that.
Belly.
So Ray, when you talk about 60% of students reach their NWA for the reading, for the math, and for social studies, what's the baseline?
So we have been fairly close to that. What it is what NWA says is a good range to be in is in the 40 to 60 range. So our goal is to be outside of that range, above it. It's the test is set up mathematically, so 50% don't make it with that. And I will say that every year that is getting harder and harder to make it as the elementary kids are coming up with increased scores and increased scores. Ours get pushed up and up and up on that. So, even if the percentage stays the same, their scores are having to grow because of the way the K-5 is pushing us. So, I mean, it's a combination of the percentage can stay the same, but their scores are going up because of the way K-5 is pushing us. And they are pushing us.
But I assume that right now we're a little lower than 60. So you're
We are just a hair
projecting
below.
some
We're a
growth.
hair below 60, but every year those scores are going up. So
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
So to stay at 60 means we're improving, or to stay at 58 or wherever exactly we are. To stay at that same growth band means our total scores are going up.
Okay.
I was interested in the science goal because it seems more behavioral than content. Are you guys seeing distraction more in the science classrooms than other places?
Well, science
or-
is the most hands-on, and as we're trying to get more hands-on and doing that, I think there are some more inherent,
opportunities
for that. I was in a classroom this morning, really talking to the 6th grade as they were going to the Gulf of Maine Institute about what it is to be a respectful citizen as we go out into the community and what's doing that. There's a lot of neat opportunities the science kids are getting with that, and we really want to make sure we're properly preparing them to represent Freeport Middle School in a good fashion.
Gotcha. Any other? Oh, Belly?
So I have a comment, and it's not just for you, Ray, it's for you and Will, it's for all the middle schools. And it relates to PBE implementation and the need to continue to focus energy on that. And Ray, you mentioned that, and thank you for clarifying that the goals from last year are ongoing, because it wasn't clear. But, I mean, the fact that we are moving on to other goals, I hope doesn't mean that we think that we're done with PBE, because there's a lot of consistency and calibration issues that still need to be resolved. So I'm hoping that the fact that you haven't spelled out those goals as your school goals doesn't mean that they're not being front and center into everything you're doing.
No, I think you're absolutely. I think, the Columbia University Reading and Writing Project, they use the word project.
They said it's not a program. Program means it's done and over, and here's your curriculum. It's a project. We're always looking to improve and do things different. And I think that's our same attitude around, all of our teaching and learning. We're always looking to get it better. We're never satisfied with where we're at, and the same with PBE.
So that means that there's still PD and PLC time allocated specifically to PBE?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's a fine line, because if you guys keep showing up with the same goals every year, we're going to push you on that, but we don't want you to think that they've just fallen off the, the back of the ship, so.
No, it's definitely discussions that, as I was in different meetings today with teachers, as I said, in the 6th grade, it came up through habits of work, and in the 7th grade, it came up through scoring criteria on a science assessment. So, of which then I brought it into Will to get feedback on him on where we are with that, so I think it's always discussions that are going on.
Okay.
I had a question on the habits of work scoring criteria. I think for parents, it's obviously one of the more confusing parts of the grading system because it is different depending on each class. And so I'm wondering, like, when you said you sat down with your advisory and you identified what it meant to be prepared, is that written and identified? Like, if I were to click in PowerSchool on preparedness for advisory, for your advisory, would it tell me what it meant to be prepared in that
So
class?
what we have linked is the overall, ones like this is what preparedness is, this is what engagement is, this is, what for that. For each teacher, I think my guess is that you have the full spectrum. You have some that do and some that do not have it there.
For the students, though, do they have somewhere where they
And I
can
would
see
say,
it?
once again, on that full spectrum, a lot of it will show up in their Google Classroom, the teachers that have that, because the scorings will show up. But, I think and that's something that obviously continuing to make it available in public, I think is, the direction we need to go in. Yeah.
I would absolutely
Yeah.
agree with that, yeah. Just so it's, because I think your message of how important the how grades are, I think that is clearly coming across with my new 6th grader,
Yeah.
because he's checking it and but he's having to do, like, I'll ask him, so what does that mean? Like, what do you need to do to improve that? But in a way, I am encouraging him to then have to go back and have a conversation with his teacher, which is great.
Yeah.
But it's also would be really nice to have some sort of reference for the kids on that.
And I think that, all the teachers have it, and most of the kids have been handed that either electronically or paper, but posted somewhere probably happens less frequently. And I have the same conversations you're having with your son with my advisory, and, some of them know exactly, this is why I have a 2.5 in engagement. The others are like, I don't know.
I don't know, I wasn't paying attention.
Exactly.
Or I think it
that's
was
what I
this one
encourage students to do,
assignment.
go back and have that conversation with the teacher so you know why you have that. Because I don't know why you have it. I just see you have a 2.5. Yeah.
I hope this isn't repetitive, or I say it clearly. It's more of a comment back to Valley's comment/question. And I feel more comfortable with where we are with PBE because I sit on that committee now. So I have the opportunity to hear our building administrators and teachers talk about it on a monthly basis, which is an open meeting, by the way. Anyone here can come to it, or anyone in the public can come to those meetings as well. But I do feel confident that PBE is very integrated into everything that's going on and has been for some time. And I think because there was so much community focus on it last year and we had some bumps in the road, I think that members of the public may think, oh, are they still focusing on PBE? Is PBE still in the goal? And I think you heard Ray's answer. He talked about teaching and learning. It's part of teaching and learning.
I think that's a really good distinction. I rarely use the term PBE with my teachers. That's not a conversation that we have. We talk about teaching and learning. We talk about instruction. We talk about rubrics. We talk about scoring criteria. We talk about, standards, indicators. We talk about aligning it. We talk about instruction. All of those practices we talked about at the last school board. Those are the conversations we have, not the headline at the top. It's the instructional model, the teaching and learning that we really focus on.
Next up, Ms. Goko, Freeport High School.
Yeah, just on the airplane.
Good evening. I'd be happy to hear. I have lots of proficiency stuff in my goals, so I know how to hook this up. Okay. So I just wanted to share tonight, or not, some reflection on the goals from last year. We, I think, did a lot of relevant work for our goals, and also had some gains that we're very proud of this year. And they are closely tied to our goals for this current school year as well. I'm doing something wrong. Oh, no, I'm not. So for our 2017-2018 goals, in terms of the elements of proficiency that we were working on, one of the first things was expanding training for our teachers last year on grading and reporting using a proficiency-based system for the ninth graders. As those of you who are members of the board know, that was a difficult situation last year because what we found were three things. We found that the scores in, I'll just keep talking. The scores in PowerSchool were not always easily understandable by parents. The data entry was not at a level that was manageable for our teachers. Though I do think for some students, the feedback that they had in PowerSchool last year was meaningful to them, but at times it was difficult for them to understand where their scores were coming from. So there was a lot of challenges with that. So we worked last year with teachers consistently on PowerSchool. We changed our grading system in the middle of the year. There were quite a few challenges that we faced, and what we landed on through feedback from all different stakeholders was to change the way that we were grading and reporting for this year. So we continue with our work for training our teachers how to best use PowerSchool to communicate the information that we want it to, which is detailed information for each student, for each class about their learning. But that was certainly a large part of what we worked on throughout the entire year last year, either in PLCs or in department meetings or faculty meetings. I'll try and make this a little bigger. I'll probably mess something up there too, though. I don't know how to do that, Kyle. The second piece of work from last year, oh, great. Thank you, was, there we go. Working on our scoring criteria. So last year, it was our ninth graders that were, all of our ninth grade courses were in a proficiency-based grading and reporting model. We knew that this year would be ninth and 10th graders. So last year, we were making sure that our scoring criteria for each and every ninth and 10th grade course would be ready to go. Which it is, and it was ready for the start of this school year so that students in every course in the 9th and 10th grade have scoring criteria that is outlined for them that's attached to their assessments. I will say scoring criteria is one of those things that is constantly a living document. When we're using it with students and seeing what works or doesn't work for them in terms of the language that we use to communicate their progress, that's where each department is working on their scoring criteria on a consistent basis, trying to make sure that students understand how to use the scoring criteria in order to improve their work. So that is something that we worked on consistently last year, and it will be a large part of what we're doing this year, so that next year all 9th and 10th and 11th grade classes have clear scoring criteria for each and every course. Last year, Habits of Work, it was our first year that we reported separately using Habits of Work. We had used the rubric in previous years, but it was the first year that it was completely separated for the 9th graders. This was a place where we had lots of feedback from all different stakeholders. It was a place where students often gave us positive feedback, that they understood why we were separating Habits of Work, that they did think it was important that they were being held to standards for Habits of Work. And it was one particular standard that they were struggling with last year, which was the focus of our work in the springtime and over the summer, where we formed a Habits of Work committee, which was a variety of teachers from each department, one representative at least from each department, to look at area schools. We pulled probably about 20 different Habits of Work rubrics, looked at the language they were using, and then worked over the summer to revise ours. So that was something that that we were working on consistently last year, of not only how are we scoring students on Habits of Work, but how are we teaching them these Habits of Work skills. We would love if every high school student showed up with all of these skills ready to go, but we know that that's not always the case. I think we know adults that still need to work on Habits of Work skills. And so it's something that we are consistently working on. How can we message to students not just the importance of Habits of Work, but actual skills for time management, for organization, for how they're working on particular tasks in class. And then the last piece was communication and feedback of our instructional practices with all different stakeholders. And so throughout the year, we held different parent events, as you know. These were things that we shared in our board updates, how we were soliciting feedback, and then trying to respond to that feedback to make necessary changes that would help our students in terms of understanding their own progress and growth, and also help parents in understanding their students, where they stood in their classes, how they could support them, and helping them to learn new elements of grading and reporting and instructional practices as well. So in a minute, I'll tell you how we're continuing with those goals for this year and where we're expanding as we move forward. But we'll move to the data. And so last year, we were looking at the NWEA scores. And NWEA, as I reported last year, was inconsistently administered at the high school. So my first year that I was here 4 years ago, we did a fall to spring administration, and then the district administrative team decided to go spring to spring administration. And so we are really looking forward to having multiple years of data, because we have not had that in the past, because there was a section of time where we were not administering the NWEA at all to our students. So we are now administering the test consistently to all 9th and 10th graders. We do unfortunately have some students, families who choose to opt them out of the test. We would love to see as high participation on the NWEA as we have in the PSAT and the SAT. We're not there yet, so we'll continue to work on that. But as you can see, our goal last year was to improve the percentage of students who are making their individual growth target by 5%. And we're happy to report that in some places we went much higher than that. We hit 5%. We hit 4.9% in one of them. We'll say 5 if we round up, math teachers. And so for the 9th graders, we had 36% of students meeting their individual math goal, growth goal in math, move up to 50.8%. And then for 10th graders, our 10th graders went from 44% of our students making their individual growth target to 66.3%. So we were really happy with that growth. And then for our reading scores, we had 48% of our students meeting their individual growth target, and that moved up to 52.7%. And for our 10th graders, this is the one we just squeaked by, was the 40% of 10th graders were making their individual growth goal, and that went up to 44.9%. Things that we attribute to the growth is looking at new practices in many of our classes, including revised assessments, clear learning targets, clear scoring criteria for students. We've implemented different support classes, things like all of our 9th graders are in guided study halls instead of a large study hall, where the largest study hall for a 9th grader is 24 students, and they go all the way down to much smaller, focused study halls for those students. And then intervention classes that we put into place last year, where we put in a math support class based on NWEA data. And we also put in a literacy support class looking at our students who were scoring significantly below grade level on the NWEA and placing them in these classes in addition to their general ed class that they had for ELA and for math. And so we were certainly pleased with that data. So moving into this year, when we look at our proficiency work, one of the things that we'll continue to do is build our teachers' capacity for using our grading system. I would say the easiest way to explain it is that we believe that we're using proficiency-based instructional practices with more traditional reporting practices for PowerSchool. We are still reporting at the standard level, so a student isn't going to just see one score for math and say, I have an 87 in math. They're going to say, I have an 87 in math, and that comes from this score in this particular standard and this score in this particular standard, so that kids are able to say, I'm doing really well in my problem solving. I need a little bit more help in my reasoning and that area of my math class. So we are also still separating out habits of work completely. So they see a score for preparedness, engagement, and work ethic, which is the revised portion of the rubric. And then they see a total overall score for habits of work. So on their report card, they're able to see not only that overall score, but they're able to see what went into that. Last year, we were reporting at the performance indicator level, which is more detailed than that. Students still see their performance indicator information on the actual rubric that the teacher gives back, but that data, we've reduced the amount of data that teachers are entering into PowerSchool while still giving that feedback to students. One of the largest pieces that we have to work on in terms of grading and reporting is our transcript. So for 9th and 10th graders, a transcript is important for different reasons, but it's not something that every 9th and 10th grader needs at this level unless they are applying to a particular program. It's our 11th and 12th graders where it's really important to have their transcript ready to go. And so we're in the process of examining what other schools' transcripts look like, and we will continue to reach out to other schools and universities. I shared with the board last year that I only visited one college, and that's I went to Brown University last year and spoke with them, asked them their feedback on what they thought an effective transcript would look like, and that's something we want to do more this year, is reach out to other universities and have our guidance counselors involved in talking to them about what do they see as elements of an effective transcript. We did that last year. If you remember, we revised our school profile, and we had multiple universities who were visiting school. We just borrowed them for a minute and had them give us some feedback on the profile. So we plan to do the same thing for the transcript this year. And the goal is to have a draft of the transcript ready to go of what it would look like by June of 2019 at the end of this school year. We'll continue with scoring criteria. As I said, the goal is by the end of this school year to have the scoring criteria ready to go for all 9th, 10th, and 11th grade classes. We're well on the way there because many of our 11th grade teachers are already using scoring criteria. They know that it's coming, know that they want to pilot that with students so that they see how well their scoring criteria is giving feedback to students. Many of the departments are looking at scoring criteria from a 9 through 12 K-12 perspective. And so they've been working on this for quite some time, but we'll continue and have the finalized drafts ready to go by the end of the school year. For habits of work, as I said before, we worked over the summer and we did make a revision where we changed our one of our indicators to work ethic. That was after long deliberation with that committee and feedback from that we had collected throughout the spring from parents, from students, and from teachers. And so we're continuing to collect feedback from teachers this year about how they see the rubric working in class, how they are handling the entering of the data that's going into PowerSchool. And we also discussed last week of, in the next couple of weeks, getting a panel of students together and asking them how they think that the rubric is working, as we did that with them last year. Last year, we only spoke to 9th graders. This year, we would speak to 9th and 10th graders, particularly students who have seen the change in the rubric and seeing if they're, what their response is to that. And then shifting back to the data. So our goal is for continued progress. We want to continue to strive to improve those scores because although we see improvement, we know that there's still plenty of room to grow. So for this school year, what we would like to see is our individual growth target for math for our 9th graders move from 50.8 up to 56% of our students meeting their individual goal. And from 66.3 to 70% for our 10th graders. And then for our ELA scores, we would like to see for the NWEA reading test, for our 9th graders, we'd like to see them move from 52.7 to 58% of our 9th graders meeting their individual goals. And from 44.9 to 50% of our 10th graders meeting their individual reading goal. In terms of strategies for that, we have added two new types of support classes. This was based on some feedback that I received from Will and Ray about really trying to parse out the needs of our students, who is really struggling with executive functioning skills and who has actual gaps in their literacy and math skills. Those are now two different support classes where in the past those kids may have been combined in a support class. And so many times the students who are struggling and have holes in their literacy understanding or their math also need executive functioning support, but some of the kids who need executive functioning support may be reading on grade level and they're at grade level for math, but they need help with task completion, time management, organization, all of those things. So we've put in those classes this year to try and see the impact of that. So I'll open it up to any questions.
Are those support classes open to board members?
Because the math gets harder and harder, the homework.
I had a question. You just talked about work ethic being added. Was that added for something that was removed from habits of work, or?
So yes. So we changed ours as preparedness, engagement, and work ethic instead of perseverance.
Okay. So I just kind of feel like habits of work is sort of the same as work ethic. Like, what's the kind of things that they look for in work ethic that's different from kind of overall habits of work?
So overall habits of work are, I think Will has explained this really well, the habits that we want you to demonstrate every day. So you need to come to class prepared, ready to go. That you have your homework done, that you have your materials, that your laptop is charged, all of those different things that you're ready to start when class is ready. Engagement is that you are minds on, that you're not just filling a seat, you didn't just show up that day, you're engaged, you're part of the discussion, you're actively listening, you're taking notes. And then work ethic is, I think it's very similar to perseverance. We changed some of the wording that we were asking for to have it be a little bit more concrete. Are you a self-starter? Are you able to follow directions that the teacher's giving? And then also on top of that, problem solve for, instead of, an example would be, we're hoping to see fewer kids sitting, waiting with their hand raised, just waiting for the teacher to come around instead of trying to access their notes or try and ask a peer for support or, show some perseverance and dig through the problem. So those are some of the elements of work ethic that we were talking about, concrete measurements for the effort that you are demonstrating in class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I don't really see this spelled out so much in your goals, but you spoke to it a little bit. I wanted to ask if you could talk to teacher voice and culture, because when we talked about PBE at the high school last year, there was a lot of concern and discussion about teacher engagement with the whole process and how it was implemented, what went well, what didn't go well. And so I would hope to see, culture and teacher and voice be part of your goal, but I'm assuming it's kind of embedded in. So could you talk to that?
Sure. So over the summer, one of the structures that I think works really well for us is we have a strong leadership team at the high school. It's representative of all our departments. It's also had some turnover, which I think has been a good thing. I think different elements of our work and different personalities and content areas are all combined on the leadership team. And so the leadership team worked over the summer. We have a 2-day retreat that we do every summer. Sometimes we do some team building. This year we just did straight work. And so we created the document based on all of the feedback of some concrete decisions that we had made based on what we felt was the best way to move forward for all sorts of things, for scoring criteria, for how we were reporting in Power School, for how we were using habits of work. They then, in our first days of school, presented it. Well, it went out to the board. The board saw that over the summer. It went out to staff. And then in our first days of school, all of the teams had 2 different chances on our first 2 days to give feedback and ask questions. So we collected all of that feedback. The leadership team meets every other week. And so they've looked at that feedback, figured out where do we need to get more feedback. A lot of the questions that teachers were asking have been answered in the first few weeks. And in the last 2 leadership team meetings, so we had one this past Tuesday, we went back and revisited. Let's see again, what were some of the decisions that we made? Why did we make that decision? How are we communicating that to our faculty? And how are we collecting feedback on that? And so we've done that for the last 3 meetings that we've had for leadership, and then discussing how are we collecting feedback in different arenas. So there's times in PLC, our PLCs meet every other day, and every teacher's on a PLC. So there's times when we are using that time to solicit feedback from teachers. But I think we certainly learned a valuable lesson last year, because the leadership team members were very invested in the decisions that we had made, and there wasn't necessarily buy-in across the board. And so I think what we're trying to make sure this year is, if we're making a decision at the leadership team level, that's then communicated clearly multiple times to our staff, and then we're figuring out how we're collecting feedback along the way.
PLC is a professional learning community.
Sorry. Oh my gosh, I don't even know when I'm saying acronyms. My apologies.
So Jen, in the past, each member of the leadership team was responsible for a number of teachers in the school who would channel their opinions or feedback through that specific leadership team member. Are you guys still doing that? That every teacher knows who in the leadership team to access to voice their opinion?
Well, that was a couple of years ago when the structure was slightly different, because in the past, most of the leadership team members were also the department chair. Now there are some that fulfill both roles, but really the leadership team and the department chair, the leadership team member, and the department chair work closely together. And we have almost every department, we're only missing world languages. And so every other department has a department chair and also has a leadership team member. So that's usually the the person that they're going to for feedback. But in addition, we spread out our leadership team members amongst the PLCs. So it might be a different leadership team member. So if they, for whatever reason, don't feel like they can approach the person who's in their department, they likely then have another leadership team member who is on their PLC team. So it's not that they're necessarily assigned to someone, but we make it clear who that person is. And we share all of our agendas with the whole staff, and we share all of our minutes with the whole staff.
So I was really pleased to see that in your goals you specifically talk about training teachers on how to use the 0 to 100 scale and still use the proficiency-based practices. I'm going to spell out the practices and not use the acronym. Because I had a question. One of my sons had an exam that was scored with grading that went above 100. And I've heard comments to the effect that there's a little bit of grade deflation now because some teachers still continue to add bonus points above 100. So in essence, if 100 isn't the top of the line, and so to get a distinguished, you may have to go to above 100 to get to the distinguished, because 100 may be just being proficient. And on a transcript, being proficient at 100 is not the same as being distinguished at 100. So are you familiar with any practice that sounds similar to what I'm saying?
I have not heard of that practice. I would say one thing is your son's a junior, so he wouldn't be necessarily in that.
No, I'm speaking about my other son who just happened to take a high school exam.
Interesting.
Which is exactly the same that's being used at the high school.
Okay. No, so I don't know of that practice of going above 100. So I'd have to look into that, but I have not heard, that's not a common practice.
And just to be aware about grade deflation and just making sure that everyone's calibrated, and also that the scoring 0 to 100 means 100 in the traditional sense of what it used to mean, because we don't want to send transcripts out where 100 means something different from what it means in the traditional scale. And I also wanted to say I'm really impressed with the great improvements in achievement, so that's excellent work.
It's tough because, when we have a year that's sort of a blip down, we're like, well, the cohort, but we get really excited when they go up. So that's great.
We do.
We'll celebrate those.
Okay.
Any other questions for Jen? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Instructional support, Bonnie Violet.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So I don't have a PowerPoint, but you do have just a description of our goals. So the first one is compliance. We can't really have a conversation about special ed unless we talk about compliance, because it's a highly regulated department and it changes quite often, actually. So I think the board members that were here in the past couple of years or so realize that we went through an audit, and that's behind us. Yay. But they did focus on a few areas that we're really working on. And I think in terms of the areas we were cited for, I think we needed to work on those areas. And essentially, it has to do with making sure that the baseline data we have in our individual educational plans for our students with disabilities include a baseline that's connected with a goal, that's connected with how we're going to measure improvement in those goals. So we're doing better with that, because what we're looking at are, basically the baseline is part of the grade level benchmarks for really K-6, I guess. And then we're looking at the expectations for students in middle school and high school. And so, similar to what Will and Ray talked about in terms of, habits of work, as well as the academics, the ELA and math and that kind of thing. So what we're doing now is really looking at the data that we're collecting and it's done in a variety of ways based on a student's individual goals. But we're focusing on student improvement, and during our professional learning time at each school, we look at very specific students and we look at the progress that they're making on their goals. And we make decisions based on, do we keep going with these goals? Do we make changes? And if students aren't improving, then we need to have a conversation about what else can we provide in terms of instruction, a different program, or more instruction or less instruction. And so we're looking to be more thoughtful about how our students are doing based on the data. Under evaluation and eligibility, probably more so than in past years, we're looking at student assistance teams and the data they're collecting to support students that are referred for special ed testing. So we're working at each of the schools, and we have strategists as well as our school psychologists looking at what the SAT teams are recommending for Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions, and whether students are making improvement and the data they're collecting before students are referred for special ed testing. Resource classrooms and inclusion, we're trying as much as we can to support our students to be in general ed classrooms. And for those students that are in more self-contained programs, we're looking at different opportunities during the school day when they can also be, a part of the school community. The principals have done a fabulous job of creating intervention blocks during the school day so that students can be part of the general ed classes and they get their specialized instruction, so that it doesn't interfere with being part of the general ed classes. We have specialized classrooms for students that have, some challenges with emotional regulation or need academic instruction because they're several grade levels below their peers. And for those classrooms, we have ed techs who also support students both in the classrooms and outside in the general ed classrooms. And what we're trying to do more of is to provide training so that they can all become certified behavioral professionals. And we have our staff overseeing what they do. And with more highly skilled staff, our students are doing better in those specialized programs. This year we got a grant through the Department of Education. It's a structured literacy grant that involves our staff as well as the RTI interventionists at the elementary schools. It's a partnership with the Children's Dyslexia Center. They're providing instruction to our staff as well as coaching and mentoring to learn a program called, it's Orton Gillingham based, and it's a heavy phonics program. And one of the representatives from the DOE observed some of our teachers and actually wrote a little blurb in the commissioner's newsletter. And I think it's part of your description today. So that was kind of nice, and I think other schools are inquiring about getting a similar grant. So that was kind of a nice thing. And then we're also providing ongoing professional development through a board-certified behavior analyst that I contract with. She provided some professional development to classroom teachers, K-5, to take a look at some strategies to support students with behavioral challenges. And this is really like for students in regular ed classrooms, and she's following up to take a look at how teachers are implementing the strategies and to give them actually some additional PD for Tier 2 as students move from Tier 1 to Tier 2, and that's before they get referred for special ed evaluations. So we're trying to strengthen our compliance, providing more professional development overall to address our students' academic needs and behavioral needs, and trying to improve how students are getting supported through, the educational technicians that we have. So that's it in a nutshell. Any questions?
Valley.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad that you wrapped it up with the 3 points that you're working on, and that I assume those are your goals for the year.
Yes.
And do you have anything in mind on how you will measure your performance against your goal?
Well, for the compliance goal, that's going to be measured based on student achievement because we're really focusing on the goals. For the academic instruction, the grant that we received, we're actually monitoring how we are doing as teachers in delivering the instruction to our students. And the DOE is actually looking at our data, which is kind of interesting. So we're monitoring, really it's based on student achievement. And I would say, the professional development for the BCBA providing instruction to the teachers, it would really be based on how our students are doing in general ed classrooms. So I would say, I guess in answer, it's all based on student achievement. That's what we're looking at. Mm-hmm.
So that the PD piece, the BCBA, does that tie into the RTIB that we've seen in the budget in the last couple of years and really trying to elevate the behavioral side of those response to intervention? Are those tied together at all, or are those different things?
Well, they're tied together, yeah. And I think the connection is that for students that are in the tier, like first tier, second tier, it's really on regular ed teachers and some of the interventionists to carry out, some of the plans for that. But the BCBA is providing consultation depending on the needs of students because some students respond to the support plans that teachers are implementing, and she doesn't really consult on those students, but there are others that are just more complex. And so she does provide some consultations, but the professional development is directly related to it. Because the strategies that she's teaching teachers to use, they can use that with any student, really. And those are students that go through the RTIB process.
And the audit from the state, how frequently is that?
Every 4 years.
Okay, so we've got a year or two before they're back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they might change it, They're going to have a new administration. Who knows?
Maddie.
Sort of a question. Do we hear from you more than once? Do we get more than one report over the course of the year?
We get one
we do.
You get one report. And
What?
The budget.
the budget,
right.
yeah.
I'm just curious, just from past conversations about attrition among your staff, and I would just love at some point in the future or some point this year, I'd love to see what that looks like and what it's looked like over time. And I'm curious about the impact on students that has specifically with your staff and your high needs students. I'm sorry, I know that's a surprise. I just thought of it, so I don't want it now. I just would love to look at it at some point.
Sure.
So I think one of the strategy steps that we had talked about under attracting and retaining staff is to figure out a way to track that data. Because we want to see if there's trends. It will be a little bit tricky but I think it would be worth us attempting to try to cluster.
Yeah, I'd love to see it so we could cut it multiple ways, right? Like
Right.
by department, by building, but
Without, breaking confidentiality.
of course.
Right, so that, I agree.
Thanks.
All right, any other? All right, thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
And last, but certainly not least, nutrition, Erin Dow. I don't think you ever get in trouble for a short report.
I know.
Will and Ray picked up all your slack, don't worry.
So we're off to a good start this year. We have had a lot of changes, but they're good ones. We had 2 retirements last year, Linda Davenport at Mass Landing and Kathy St. Michel at Durham. And so Deanna Coro, who's here tonight, took the helm as kitchen manager at Mass Landing after a long stint solo at Pownell Elementary School. Stephanie Moyer, who was a cook here, then was elevated to the manager position at Pownell, so now she's there. That created an opening for the food service assistant position here that we hired Marie Dowdy for. She came to us from McDonald's, actually, and she has been a firecracker and a really great addition to our staff. She's super dedicated and super high energy. Deb Koval, who was a food service assistant at Durham, then was elevated to the manager position at Durham, which opened up another position, which we hired Morgan Napolitano for. She's from Durham and a parent of a student there. And then, what else? It's starting to sound like a country music song. So then one of our short 15-hour-a-week positions at the high school, the person that was working there went to work at Laugh and Learn full-time. So we just hired another person at the high school, and then we added a high school senior here at the middle school to help out with dishes. So pretty much every kitchen has seen a shake-up, but the new staff that we've added have all worked out great. We're excited about our new hire at the high school. The meals that we're serving district-wide continues to rise at a pretty steady and manageable level, but especially at the high school and the middle school. So we're looking for next year to increase some hours here at the middle school to support the increase in the number of meals that we're serving. Right now we're offering at the high school, for example, 6 or 8 options for breakfast every morning. And upwards of 12 entree and a la carte options, which is having a huge impact. Has created a staffing issue, but we're working on that because we started out of the gate with about 200 lunches served per day this year, which was a great number on its own. But then within a week of starting the school year, they broke their own high record and then did it 2 more times in the next few weeks. So this is a great problem to have, and they're dealing with it well, and we are staying within our budget. But I'm really glad that I asked for a little extra food budget money this year because that'll help keep us on track for that. Our goals for this year to continue to work on the breakfast participation at all the schools by offering more variety every day. We're trying a couple of different service models, just kind of piloting them to see what works for different schools. But I think, as we all know, in a a multi-town district, sometimes it just has to do with what latitude and longitude you're at. Sometimes things work in Pownell and they don't work in Durham or Freeport. So we're trying to tease it out because what's clear to me after being here for a year now is that all the schools are different, and so we try to have consistency across the program in terms of quality and service, but I'm trying to figure out how to tailor it so that it works best for each of the communities in the RSU. We've seen notable gains in breakfast participation at Pownell Elementary, where they're up over 8% over last year, and Mass Landing is up 3%. And lunch counts district-wide are on track to see an 8% increase by the end of November. So we'll take it. I did a huge push this year on free and reduced applications. I know I've talked to you guys about this before. We do have a higher median income in these communities, but I tried something different this year. I sent out the free and reduced applications by mail and online, and in it I attached kind of almost like an infographic, which is like, if you do this, then you may get this, and just kind of broke it down and made it seem less inaccessible like the standard federal forms do. In addition, I added a list of benefits that households with free and reduced eligible students can avail themselves of, notably free or super cheap cell phone service, including data, really cheap cable, $150 laptops or home computers that are offered by Spectrum and Comcast. And these are things that these companies don't advertise, but generally they're the result of like antitrust negotiations when one company takes another one over, and they'll say, yeah, we'll let you have a borderline monopoly as long as you help out indigent customers in your service area. So they don't advertise them, but I do. And, you know, I got 6 or 7 families this year out of, let's say, 100 applicants, paper applicants that called in and they wanted the letter. It worked. But at the same time, even though our free and reduced percentage only went up about 2% district-wide, of those students who were eligible, the number of them that qualified because they're SNAP or TANF recipients, so state food aid, or homeless, or foster children, was up 49%. And as interestingly, the number of families that qualified for free meals based on their income application was up 23%, which is not, you know, it's disproportionate to the overall district increase in student enrollment. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about why this is, and I think it comes down to the fact that I'm trying everything I can, and it seems to be helping. The amount of student debt that we have has decreased significantly, and I think some of it is just based on the parents' willingness to apply when they weren't willing to apply before. So I'm happy to see that happening for us. So given the factors, you know, the goals for the program this year are to continue to reach as many customers as we can. We want to continue to, you know, hone and craft some menus that have the broadest appeal district-wide. And we want to make sure that the most kids that possible can avail themselves of the services that we offer or choose to, one or the other. So we're going to continue to work on collecting our negative account balances owed to the program. We are making some gains on that, and that way we'll be able to maintain our financial integrity, which will allow us to continue to improve things. So if you have any questions, I'm ready.
I want to express gratitude for the work that you're doing on behalf of the kids that really need you. I mean, we know a lot of those kids, school is the place where they feel the safest, and I'm grateful that you're making sure that they get fed. I also wanted to comment, you know, obviously I ask questions about culture a lot, and I'm impressed with your report and how you named everybody by name, and you're clearly in touch with everybody personally who works for you, and going so far as to hire a student to work in the middle school is great. So thank you for your work there as well, and I'm sure that what's happening in the culture of your staff is also why the program's doing so well, because you can feel that ripple effect.
Absolutely.
And I was glad to hear you talk about breakfast, because I was here in this school this week touring with Ray and asking about breakfast. And I was asking him what some of the obstacles are. And in our conversation, it strikes me that some of the things that may be obstacles to getting breakfast to our kids may not have really anything to do with your department. It's has to do with time and teachers and busing, and it's a complicated thing to solve for. So I guess it's not really a question, but I'm glad you're trying to crack that nut.
Yeah, Darren Carter and I worked last year, towards the end of the year, on trying to develop some sort of pilot program to increase breakfast participation here. We ended up running out of time before the end of the year. Things just got crazy, but it's definitely on our radar to get some of the middle school kids participating more, because it seems to be one of our lowest participation demographics. Having a middle schooler and 2 former middle schoolers, I know that a lot of it comes down to the social aspect. The kids want to be in a situation where they can socialize and breakfast doesn't really fit into that program. So we did look at some ways to get the breakfast into the classroom directly or into the hallway where kids congregate, and so it's on our radar for sure.
And I think they're probably one of the ones that need it the most, because I don't know about you guys, but getting the middle schooler up and out in the morning, I mean, the little one, she's up and doing all sorts of stuff in the morning, but the middle schooler, you know, he was literally stuffing toast in his mouth as he was running out to the bus this morning. So, you know, they don't give themselves a lot of time. And it was interesting because as you were talking about saying, you know, what works here might not work in a different school, I think even within the same school. I mean, my daughter's class last year, because of the wing they were in, it took too much time to send them down for breakfast, so she just never let any of them go.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, even within the same school, it can really vary.
Mhm.
So. Val- Oh. Kate?
I was just curious of the students that are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. You named two different, I guess, categories of that qualify you: SNAP and TANF, and then income-based.
Yep.
Are there other criteria that can qualify you? I'm just wondering. I just am curious for my information, just like, okay, so we only went up by 2%, so that means that there's a group of students or category that used to be a higher percentage of our free and reduced lunch that no longer is, if we increase these two categories so
Sure.
much.
I don't know what the explanation is for that. I started to look into whether or not the qualifications or the income limits have changed for SNAP or TANF benefits. I know 2 or 3 years ago in Winthrop, we had a big drop in the number of direct certification recipients when they kicked a bunch of people off of the state aid. So I don't know the answer to the question. I mean, I know the answer to your initial question, which is how can people qualify. The people who are receiving state aid, so SNAP or TANF, are considered homeless or foster children by the courts. All come to me directly on a list straight from DHS. So that's how they get on. I check that list 3 or 4 times a week. I cross-check those students against our student rolls, which is no easy task. I was just explaining to Becky today how I did it, because we have a lot of families in this district that have 2 or even 3 last names in the household. And so I get a list from DHS, and maybe one kid with one last name gets SNAP benefits. But that means that the other 2 kids in that household are also eligible for free breakfast and lunch. But I don't know that because they're not on the list. I don't know these families, and there's no way to cross-check it except for what I ended up doing, which was literally printing out a list of all of the families that had multiple last names, sorting it, and then checking them manually one by one. So some of that increase is from that. But the other ways that, again, you can qualify are based on your income. I can do an administrative approval in a serious situation, like if a student is couch surfing, or if a parent dies and I'm told that the family's really struggling. So I can do things like that, but those are pretty rare as well.
So of the students whose families receive SNAP or TANF, do they need to apply?
No.
So they automatically get the free or reduced?
That's right. I get a list before school starts. I send them a letter letting them know that they are already pre-approved and they don't need to apply. Some families still send it in because they didn't get the letter or didn't read it, but they don't have to send an application in. So
the applications that you send out are to the recipients who you think based on income would qualify?
Yeah.
Okay.
Every household every student in the district gets an application, and we have an online application as well.
Mara.
I just wanted to echo what the prior board member, I think that's what I'm supposed to say, it said about your outreach. Thank you for doing that. I think that's just great. I was wondering, I'm not familiar with how students pay for their lunch.
Mhm.
Does it look the same when students who are getting free and reduced lunch or breakfast pay the same way that other students do?
I couldn't hear you.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Like
Do the
literally couldn't hear
oh,
you.
Sure. I'm new to this microphone. Do the students who get free and reduced lunch or breakfast pay with the same method that others do?
Well, free students don't.
Oh, right. So they just
So,
don't
yeah,
pay.
They just
give
don't pay.
anything. Okay.
It's expressly prohibited that there's any outward identification of a student's lunch eligibility. Obviously, our cooks know because when they press lunch, it'll come up as 40 cents if it's reduced or $2.90 if it's full pay. But the methods of paying us for meals is the same irrespective of the student's eligibility.
So there's an online system, and each kid
Oh,
has a
thanks.
code, and I'm 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4. They punch it in,
Yeah.
and that will tell them 2.10, 40
so
cents.
they give their code. It's not a card.
Right.
Yeah, and parents can pay online through e-check or credit card, or they can send money into the school.
Okay. So they would type in their code, and then the kids who would have free lunch or free breakfast wouldn't pay anything.
Right.
And those that didn't would.
Yeah, and most kids are not handing over money every day, so that further removes the eligibility
Distinction.
identification or distinction
Right.
from the day-to-day lunch purchase.
Okay, right. Like,
Yeah.
so if some kids weren't giving money and feeling like other
Yeah,
kids could see
no,
them
it's
not paying.
most kids are not giving money either because
Yeah.
they're not paying or they have a credit.
They have a credit. Yeah, the parents. Yeah, okay. And then one last question I had is, are main care recipients eligible?
I wish. I've
Okay.
been pushing this issue personally with DHS and DOE just because I think that if you can be eligible for subsidized health care, you should get free breakfast and lunch. But at this point, the way that they calculate the household income and what they take into account in that income is different for the two programs. So main care is not a categorical eligibility. But what I will tell you is I work with community ed, and when we identify parents who have like applied for scholarships and stuff because they're main care recipients, that comes to me, and then a lot of times I'll reach out to the family and say, listen, I saw that you applied for a scholarship for Laugh and Learn, or for the Seaside Camp, but you're not receiving free and reduced benefits. Would you care to apply? And that's working out well too.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I also want to echo just all the great thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And the overall increase in lunches, is it mostly related to a high school and middle school level, or are you seeing an equal increase for the K through 5?
No, I think the bulk of the percentage increase is definitely attributable to these two schools, in part because of their population between the two schools. The elementary levels are pretty much holding at where they were at the end of last year, which is higher than it was at the beginning of the year. And we always expect to see a little bump in the participation rate at the beginning of the year because the kids are excited. Then they kind of get into the lunch routine for about a month, and then it's usually after Thanksgiving we see a bump again when all of us parents are sick of packing lunches again.
So do you think there may be any relationship too with the level of quality increase in the high school and the middle school? Because I have a child in high school, middle school, and then elementary school.
Yep.
And I see that the food at the higher levels has increased the quality in an amazing way. I
Yep.
mean, now they want to eat the school lunch.
Yeah.
Whereas at the elementary grades, I still see in the menu more processed foods, more repetitive items on the menu. And I was wondering if it was a goal of yours to at some point try to have more scratch-made foods and
Oh, absolutely.
at the lower levels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The trick is finding what works for the lower levels. We've tried Asian, we've tried Mexican, we've tried all kinds of different things, and we've tried them over and over and over again. And as my staff will attest, it's a process. But what I will say is, I'm committed to this Asian thing. I don't know, well, because I love Asian food. It's just a thing. But we're working at the high school on developing some Asian menus there because we know the kids are more exposed to it, more open to it, and then we're finding products that we like, and then I'm sorry guys, but I'm dragging it back down to the elementary school again. So yeah, for sure. But when we've run some of the homemade things, and maybe it's me, maybe it's what I like, and it's not resonating with them yet, but that's a work in progress to find some stuff that we can, that'll work within the facilities and the time constraints that we have, and also appeal to them.
Well, I'm glad you're not giving up on them, because there
No,
are
no.
all kinds of statistics. You need to give them 15 times the same food
Absolutely.
before they'll eat it. So
Absolutely.
keep at it.
Oh yeah, we will.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I loved seeing all of the promotions from within your own department. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was so excited.
I mean, I'd love to see that as like a flow chart, which is great. So I appreciate your efforts on that and bringing in new folks. And my daughter will be mad if I don't tell you that she loves the fish sticks. Sorry. And she's a script. Yeah.
I know.
No, she'll eat anything you put in front of her. She loves all fresh food and vegetable. First, I was surprised, but she was like, we love the fish sticks, so there we go. But she'll eat Asian if you put it there.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of last year, I think, or one of the times that you were visiting with us, we talked about possibly trying to integrate the nutrition program with the curriculum and having more interaction between you and the classroom and trying to promote good, healthy eating habits. Is that something that you would ever have time for, or are you considering
Yeah,
as a goal for the near future?
That's ideal for everyone. It's good for our business, and it's good for the students, especially at the lower levels, I think. That's exactly what Darren and I were working on at the end of last year, was a competition between the 3 grades to develop a breakfast menu. And part of that was the education on why we serve the meals that we do, so that kids understand why it's a whole grain chicken, or a whole grain roll as opposed to the white roll that we like. So yeah, that we started to make strides that way, but we didn't quite get there. But it's definitely on the list, and it's actually one of the questions that I asked all 7 people that ended up changing positions this year was, what do you envision as your role in bridging the gap between the nutrition program and the curriculum, because I do want to screen for that as well, and everybody's on board, and we just got to figure out a way to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, board comments, committee reports. Bye, Jeremy. Safe travels. So the MSMA conference was the Thursday and Friday after our last board meetings. And Candy was our delegate at the delegate assembly, and there was a variety of questions, resolutions that we talked about. But I think Candy wanted to go over those and
to tell you what happened, since you gave me the power to raise my hand for the way you all wanted to vote. In your packets, you have the resolutions that were approved. And one thing I would say is that I've been to that delegate assembly several years, and there was more discussion about things this year than I've ever seen before. There's a lot of discussion about these things. So I know you might not have had a chance to read this. I don't know whether you want to take a minute or we'll just go through it. It's in your purple folder.
Yeah, it's in your purple folder. I mean, I guess the ones that stuck out to me were the proficiency one, which
Right.
failed.
Right, okay, we'll just go down through. Obviously, the one about school safety passed. And it passed with some focus on some different kinds of things: risk assessment, social emotional support, training about early warning signs, increased funding, and then to get a task force that would look at advice, consent, and disseminating best practices. So that's kind of the highlight of that one. And obviously, the gun-free schools passed. And in the last sentence of that resolution, the group thought that having schools somehow monitor guns that might be locked or unlocked out in cars was unworkable. So, okay. And then CDS, Child Development Services, moving to public schools, passed, with quite a discussion about cost issues, space issues, all of that kind of thing, and looking at this as a gradual kind of process, not doing it, boom, next year they're all going to the public schools. But with the whole move to more pre-K in the schools, this CDS is, I don't know whether everybody knows, is the development services for younger kids who have identified disabilities, that kind of thing. And again, forming a task force because they want a plan developed for how that's going to happen, what the timeline will be, what the cost will be, that kind of thing. So, and particularly develop the funding part of the plan, because obviously they want the state to pay for this.
I thought it was interesting that one of the things they asked for and specifically changed the resolution to say was that it would be outside of the regular EPS formula.
Yes.
So it's
Yep.
not going to get lumped in with a
Right.
bunch of other things. It would be a
separate
line item that says, this is what you're
Funding for
getting.
this.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Okay, special education reform. There was a discussion about how the original Individual with Disabilities Education Act, is more than 40 years old, and there's talk at the federal level about reviewing it, revising it, that kind of thing, and that it needs to be reviewed and amended on both the federal and state level. I guess in 2016, MSBA, they made a reasonable proposal for changes at the state level and to our state Congress. And they feel that legislation should be introduced right away and urging Maine's congressional delegation to support that, and also to support it when it comes up at the National Congress, that we should support reviewing and making amendments but the big thing, there are two things: to meet students' needs and look at the cost. Those are the two big things in this area.
And this was one that we as a board had said no to.
I have to go back and look. I have that.
It was, and I think it was because it was like, hey, we think they should do our reasonable things we want them to do, and we didn't feel like we had enough information about what those
Yes.
reasonable things were.
I have it marked as a question mark. We didn't say yes or no.
Right.
Board.
And then I'm not sure if it was different information that they gave us at the delegation, but there was a little bit more detail about, these are the 5 areas that they wanted to address, and they were pretty reasonable. So
Yeah.
I think if we had had that additional data, we probably would have been okay with that one as well.
Okay, and then one that was introduced at the Assembly and wasn't on our original proposals was the next one, the supporting rebuilding infrastructure of local schools. And this resolution wants them to provide $30 million from the state's rainy day fund to begin the process of rebuilding the infrastructure. And this is specifically for small maintenance and construction projects, and to keep it a separate fund from the larger fund for rebuilding schools, that kind of thing. So that passed. School attendance, mandatory attendance at age 5, school attendance at age 5, I should say, passed with a recommended beginning age of 5 and a compulsory attendance at age 6. Right now, the compulsory is 7, and generally the group felt that that's too old for compulsory attendance. So that's where that was. And there were a couple things that were voted down. One was the proficiency-based diploma. That got voted down, and the whole discussion about that was the same things that went on here. diploma versus learning and all the uproar and everything else. So that, the diploma thing was voted down. And there was
Primarily because of, sorry, Candy,
No.
primarily because of the idea that that should be a local decision, district by district. If you want to have a proficiency-based diploma, by all means, go ahead and do that. If you don't want to, you shouldn't be required to, so.
Yeah. And the other one was minimum wage for teachers and a longer school year. That was in one resolution to begin with. They separated them. Both of them were voted down. And again, a lot of it had to do with local control kind of thing. The minimum wage one really had to do with a discussion that you can't say what the minimum wage needs to be in Portland, Cape Elizabeth, and whatnot, and what the minimum wage needs to be up in the counties, that there's just too much difference there with what's necessary. And that should be a local control thing. And the longer school year one right now requires 175, and they wanted to go to 180 days, which is like most of a larger part of the country. And again, it came down to local control and deciding what the school year was, and that, so that was voted down as well. That's pretty much it.
So Candy, was there any discussion about state funding for the things that were voted down because of local control? Say, for example, for the minimum wage, if there had been some assurance that the state would cover that minimum wage,
That
would have changed
That was in the original resolution, I think, starting at 40,000, and that the state would cover some of that, but that was voted down.
even with the state covering
Yeah.
it.
I'm just wondering how that works, because I believe that was part of Janet Mills'
Yeah,
agenda, so now that
we'll see.
I mean, so does that mean that we may have a government that supports it, but the Department of Education won't, but
Well, it's not, this
MSBA
isn't the
won't?
Department of Education.
Right.
So this is the lobbying group for school boards and school superintendents. So it just means it's not going to be part of their platform for things that they want to push for the legislature to be working on. It was an interesting conversation on that one. That one took quite a while.
Yes.
I was glad to see they separated the two things, because they were really two separate
Yeah,
issues.
very definitely.
But they certainly do tie together, right? So, you know, if $40,000 passes, but 175 days stays, well, you just increase their minimum wage even more, right? Because before it was tied to more hours in the classroom, and, you know, so there is a tie between the two, but, you know, it was really felt like there wasn't a lot of confidence that even if they said they were going to cover the $40,000, that they would actually do that, right? So, and just the discrepancy between the districts around the state.
Right.
You know, there was some really small districts up there with, you know, declining enrollments, and they were like, you know, if we had to do
way.
this, this would be a deal breaker, and we would have to start firing teachers because we
Right.
couldn't afford $40,000 apiece. So, you know, I think that was one of the big things. I was surprised about how apparently short our school year is compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a good 5 days shorter than
Yes.
anybody else. You know, and then they talked about, well, it's because of the summer and it's because of this. And I was sitting with the board chair from Brunswick in the back because we weren't allowed to vote. And he's like, well, why don't we just get rid of one of the vacations? I was like, you should talk to Kate Brown. She's been working on that for years. I mean, I think that is the way to do it if you wanted to do it, is not necessarily add it beginning or end of the year, but get rid of one of those vacations in the middle. But, I mean, it was an interesting conversation for sure about, you know, what's the role. I mean, I do think the role of the state is, you know, that's not really a local decision on how many days they go to school. I mean, that's typically driven by the state. But, yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of it was left to local decision-making based on what your district needs.
So do you get the sense that if the state were to, basically the DOE were to write legislation to increase the minimum wage, and they were to basically guarantee
like
state
55% funding?
Yeah, would...
I mean, that's already in legislation. They're still not doing it.
Yeah,
So.
but would the MSBA oppose it?
I don't know if they would. I mean, I'm not sure if someone came
Because
to
that
them
would be a
and-
different
Right,
story.
right.
Opposing that would be a little hard to swallow.
I think so, right, yeah, I think it's a different story whether they're advocating for it and trying to push for it, or if somebody offered it to them in a way that was really a, a commitment. I don't know. People
We'll
didn't
see.
really believe they would live up to it, so, unfortunately.
I would say, like, just over history, you might be able to rely upon it for up to 8 years, and then
Right.
then it gets pulled out from under you, and you're
Right.
stuck holding the bag with higher, having to pay a higher wage, and you've already set the bar.
Right, you can't be like, all right, everybody's getting a wage cut. I mean,
Yeah.
that wouldn't, yeah, so. The other thing, do you want to, yeah, so I ran into, I couldn't remember his last name, Mick Roy, who is the executive director. He's the assistant superintendent of Bonnie Eagle School System, but he's also the executive director for the, what's it called? The regionalization group that we were looking to become a member of last year. And he and I were just chatting about how it was going for them, and, he wanted to know when we were going to join, and I said, well, probably not today. I said, but, it's not something we want to shut the door on, but, I don't think we're ready to commit to it today, based on our conversations from last year. I don't think a lot of those questions had been answered yet. But he did follow up with Becky last week to let her know that they have to have their report into the DOE this week of who their members are and any prospective members. So not prospective members are not obligated to become members, similar to what we did last year. Basically said, yeah, we're interested in talking to them about it. But if we don't put our name as a prospective member, and in the spring we review it, or in the winter when we're looking at budgets, et cetera, we decide this is something we want to consider, we would forego our subsidy for the 19-20 year. Right? So if we say we're a prospective member and we decide to do it, then we can get that subsidy, which is next year expected to be about $55,000 for being part of the regionalization group. If we don't put our name as a prospective member and we decide we don't get that 55, they may still accept us. We may still be able to take advantage of the services, et cetera, if we wanted to, but we wouldn't get the subsidy for it. But if we said, yes, we're a prospective member, we relook at it in January or February and we go, no, we're still not there, we're not obligated to move forward with it. So Becky and I were talking today about, do we want to keep that door open for consideration as we move into the budget time, and put ourselves down as a prospective member for them, as not to close that door.
What's the date by which we would need to decide we were no longer prospective?
I believe, so the beginning of February, when the ED 279s come out. So my suggestion to Becky was, the first meeting in January, let's put it on for a conversation, so that we can get an update on where we stand with it and have a conversation about, is this something we want to consider or not? And then we can give them the sort of final yay or nay on that. And just as a reminder for how it works, if we wanted to join the regionalization group, we would, at this point, have to make an application for acceptance because they've already formed. They're already a legal group. The existing members would have to vote to accept us. I don't imagine there would be a huge issue with that.
They're asking us when we're joining.
Right. Well, that's the executive director. He's not a voting member, right? So you would hope he's got a good pulse on what their feelings are. And, frankly, the more people involved, the more people taking advantage of the training, the sort of the economies of scale thing that we were talking about earlier in a different scenario. So more people involved is a good thing, I think. So, so I guess what we were just looking for from you guys tonight was, is anyone really opposed to just having ourselves listed as a prospective member?
I'm not opposed to it, but I would hope that we would have access to a lot more information, given that they are now formed and underway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much I mean, they formed over the summer. Several of them just have had their referendum votes last week, so it's not like they're deep into the thick of it just yet. We'll have a bit more than we did last year, but.
So we're not going to have a lot more information. So Michelle and I talked about that today because for poor Mara sitting here, there are 3 areas that the group have agreed to work on, and one's professional development. That's pretty much focused on our coaches and people that are in that kind of quasi-administrative role, right? Teacher leaders, that kind of thing.
Not sports coaches.
Right, not sports coaches. So thank you. Instructional coaches, literacy coaches, math coaches. And so for that, there are going to be like 3 trainings, and we are sending a few of our people to be a part of that. The first one is at the end of November, but then the other 2 will be in March and May. So we will have the feedback on how did that training go in November. The other 2 areas are something they're calling the Leadership Academy, and this is really to try to encourage other people to become administrators or to support people that are early into their administration, and that's not going to begin until next May. So you're not going to really have anything further about that. And then the third place is the food co-op, where we would possibly go in when we're purchasing things like milk or paper. And that really runs from February until January of the next year. So I think that process will just be starting up too. So it really is around, do you have different feelings about it, right? So it is, I did the math today with Michelle Lichtai, and it's after a call to the state, so it'll be about $50,000 that we would be giving up for this upcoming budget that we're building.
So my initial response is that if it seems like we're able to partake in the programs that they offer, and I assume that we're just paying them a fee, and there's no issue with them not taking us if we want to participate, and there is no new information to be discussed in January, then my sense would be let's not have that whole discussion again. We have plenty to talk about, especially in January, and let's continue the way we are. I mean, it sounds like we are not having to commit to all the things that were risky that we talked about, but we do get the benefits of participating when we want to and when we find it worth sending people and paying for the service. So having had this conversation, I'm more inclined to not put our name down as a perspective.
I think that putting our name down as a perspective, if it doesn't if there's absolutely no repercussions for that, I don't know why we wouldn't, I guess.
It's just a question of our time at board meetings and how much time or energy or desire we have to basically rehash the exact same conversation we had last year.
Okay, so you're saying because you don't want to because we'd have to make the vote in January, go from perspective to do the vote.
Committed,
okay,
right?
That makes sense.
And we won't have anything new to
Right.
add to last year's conversation.
So we only get like 2 months to be this perspective.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we do.
You don't know that you won't have new information by February.
I do. I mean,
Well,
I guess I really do. I mean, I can't imagine what new information I'm going to have because they're not going to have any other than the November. We're going to have, Cynthia, how many people are we sending in November?
3 to 5. Yeah.
3 to 5 people. So we can get feedback from those 3 to 5 staff members. But we're not going to have further information about the food co-op, and we're not going to have further information about how the Leadership Academy's going. And we know from my discussion today that we're talking about $50,000. I don't see that changing.
Right, so, I mean, I guess my thought on it is, I think the other piece of information we might have is a budget from them on what their budget for next year is, right? What's our money in to be involved,
Yes.
right? We don't know that today. And what I didn't feel was fair to do is to, not raise this tonight, we don't put our name down, and that's $50,000 we never get back, right? So, it's still $50,000, right? So we can take advantage of the programming if we want. But last year we gave up $25,000 or $26,000 to not be a member, and next year is double that at 50. I mean, so, yeah.
So I'm sure we talked about this when we talked about this last, but does it cost anything to join, to be in the group?
Yeah, I feel like the first, I'm trying to remember what the memorandum of agreement was, but it was something like, it was $1,000 per member for a membership fee. And most of the first year was funded by the state for the they were paid for 50% of the executive director and those sort of things. So, the budget piece going forward to me is an important piece, right? I mean, Becky and I talked about this. If it costs $55,000 to be a member and we get 50, well, no thanks, we're out. But if it costs $5,000 to be a member and we get $50,000 for it, maybe it's worthwhile to consider.
And do we have that opportunity every year to be prospective, or after this year it's out?
No, I think it's, I don't think, it didn't make it sound, I mean, we were prospective last year and we can do it again this year, so.
So it's not like we're closed after this year, no one else?
No, you can always petition or request to become a member of any regional center. What we don't know if in future years there will be any funding at all that's given. It was just kind of a 2-year guarantee. The first year for us meant 26 and the second 50.
So we would lose the funding, but not necessarily the ability to join at any point in time.
Oh, right. We could join in, in February 15th if we wanted to, right?
That's what I recall.
We wouldn't get the funding, we wouldn't get the benefit of being, a member other than, the programmatic benefits. We wouldn't get the financial benefit from the state. What was that, John?
Saying to get out of the organization required a vote of the organization.
Sure.
So without getting, you still have to pay.
Or you go dormant,
You wanted to
right?
get out theoretically. The guidelines weren't very clear.
Right. Right, so that was the other question. I mean, I'm not sure, to your point of we won't have a lot of information about the programs they're offering. I don't think that was our hang up. I don't think we were worried that the PD they were going to offer wasn't going to be useful to us, or I mean, Erin spoke about the buying power and how, she thought that was a great opportunity for us. I think the question for us was more, will the funds be there going forward, the incentive piece of it, and if we did want to get out, what does that look like? So.
And remember that if you want to get out, what it requires is you can stay in and go dormant, or if you really want out, then that has to go back to the regional center is the Greater Sebago Alliance, and so they have to vote, and the big piece that they have to answer is, in allowing a district to be removed, does that do harm to the greater good?
Right.
I guess when I was saying you don't know, that we won't know more information, I didn't mean the programming necessarily. I mean, you never know what sort of new information might pop up from now until February concerning this.
Anything.
Anything, yes. But in this case in particular, regarding the regionalization and the progress they've made in developing a budget, or the state decides something different.
Yes, I definitely think if you want that kind of information, Mick has offered to come to one of our meetings and kind of present that to you. So, I mean, if that is the kind of information that would be helpful, we could definitely do that.
Okay, so maybe just sort of a straw vote on, prospective member, not prospective member. Yep.
I'm just gonna abstain from the straw vote. I mean, just because I don't know what it is.
Yeah. We can't force anybody to
It
vote.
doesn't sound like, to me, like, what do I want to say? I don't see the harm in doing it, but I don't know more about it. If I don't know more about it, I don't,
Okay. So, in favor of being a prospective member? Opposed?
Is that split?
Yep. No, was it? No, it was 4-3, right?
No, it's split.
It's 4-3, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
3.5.
So 3.5 to 3.5, great. Thanks, Maddie. We have, the letter has to unfortunately be in by the 15th. So we found that out that this week, that this was one of the questions, so.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I was saying, why wouldn't we wait till the last minute to back out?
Right, why close the door?
Yeah, why are we
before
closing the door now?
Right. Because even if we're a prospective member and we decide, you know what, we don't even want to talk about this in January, we just let it expire. It's like an option, right? We leave the option on the table, but.
I would say I'm for that, for what you said.
We could use your
Sorry.
vote.
Okay, so now that's a 4-4 vote.
Wait, is it 4-4 now? Did I make it worse? I'm just trying to
Who wants to text Jeremy?
Jeremy would agree with me.
I love it. Yeah.
I would go back to what Valley said, and I would agree that, we just spent, I don't know, I took time. Let me tell you how much time we spent. We've spent like 16 minutes on this, and we have several members that are missing, and I guarantee if this gets put on an agenda for right before we have to vote, it'll probably be a long, lengthy discussion. So I think we just have to either decide whether, we're committing to that and putting it on the agenda, or we're going to let it die today.
Right, so is an hour of our time to discuss it potentially worth $50,000? And I mean, to your point of there's 3 voting board members not here, that's tough to take away.
Can we vote again?
Can we do a different kind of process?
Yeah.
Can maybe, I don't know if this is legal. Could you guys meet and present us with, like, do all the discussing by yourselves or in a small group? Can there be another meeting, like a small meeting? And then you present all of us with, like, the pros and the cons, and we try not to discuss it for too long.
In January?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I think we could do that. Yeah, I mean,
Getting too
well, I mean, we can certainly put together a proposal, and what you all choose to talk about is tough to control.
I would say we already know what the pros and the cons are based on last year's discussion, so I wouldn't want to charge a group to go and do that for us, because
Okay.
I really think, like, I could flip my vote in a heartbeat. I just need to know there's no more information. Like, I don't want to close the door yet. So if we come February and there's no more information, okay, we're done. That's where I'm at with that.
Well, I mean, how many times are they going to meet?
The group?
The group, before,
I don't know. I think they have a meeting next week, but it's not, I think the new information, when you're looking at a budget, I did do a little bit of probing around that today with Mick. And, there's no certain number, but I kind of took away from it that it would cost there definitely is the $1,000 membership fee, and then, there's this executive director that might end up costing going forward like maybe $5,000 or $6,000. So it's going to be.
Per district?
That's kind of what I took away, but, but he was, there wasn't a hard number, right? Because, of course, he was saying we're always trying to keep the administrative costs down. But I just think I would think it's going to cost us something. So you add say 5,000, and then you add the one. So I think there would be some kind of cost around, and there might be a cost to join that food co-op I think that was discussed. So just say it's going to cost us 6,000, maybe a little bit over that. Then you're really looking at then having a net gain of 44,000. I know that I had at least 3 conversations with Michelle, like, there were times when I don't even want to bring this up, and I landed on you're going to be the one to bring it up, because I felt like you guys gave me a clear message last spring, but then this came up because of the conference.
It came up because of the conference, and I think the discussion last spring was, this isn't even formed yet. We don't know who's going to be a member. What if it's only 2 or 3 people? I mean, there is more information than we had last spring, and if they don't have a budget for us to look at, then I am a hard no. Like, I'm not taking that risk. But, yeah.
I remember a lot of discussion about our RSU and all the pain we've been through in terms of forming the RSU, and is it going away or is it not? And for me, that was a bigger point of discussion at the time, so I'm not changing my vote. I'm disinclined.
And last year would have required a referendum vote, and this no longer requires a referendum vote.
But I don't want to be the board that makes a decision like that without the community backing us up.
So, okay, so we're at 4-4, yeah.
I think I've changed my mind. I think we're going to either spend like an hour talking about it in January, or we're going to spend a lot of time explaining to the 3 missing people why we gave up an opportunity possibly for $50,000. If anyone thinks that that's something that might come up. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but by then we've lost that opportunity. Right. And I understand they could be here tonight and they're not.
I understand their point of view, but every board member knows votes that happen when you're not present.
It wasn't
Tough
on the
luck.
agenda though, and it's a straw vote. So it's
Okay. I know I'm changing my vote. So if anyone is anyone else? Because I think that would. Difference. Especially what you just said, it's not on the agenda, so this is like shock to the 3 that aren't here. So I think to be fair to them, because I don't know how I would feel maybe if something wasn't on the agenda. I mean, I don't think I personally would have an issue with it, but you never know. And if it wasn't on the agenda and then 3 people aren't here to that, I guess I'm getting technical with that, but that would be where I would kind of put my opinion right now on that.
okay. And we can, when we have our next board meeting, before we put together a whole presentation to spend an hour, we can catch up with these people, and if we feel like, hey, they're still not, they would have been hard no's, then we don't even have the presentation. But all right.
Fine, I'll change my vote.
No, I just.
I'll change.
No, that's
I'm not
okay.
changing my vote because I don't think there'll be any news. I mean, there won't be any change in terms of the risk associated with leaving the organization. And if you go dormant, whether you'll be saddled with fees or whether you're still required to pay to sustain this organization alive. So all those risk factors are still in play, and I'm still not all that comfortable with it.
Okay. So Valley's opposed to being prospective. Who else is opposed to being a prospective member at this point? Okay. So we'll let Mick know that we are, what's that?
We'll have another hour plus long
Yeah.
conversation, I know. I'll just sit
Yeah, I mean, I think for that kind of money, it's probably worth the conversation. Even if we come to that I mean, I think we very well may come there, but I think it's worth the conversation to have as many facts as we can, and, don't close that door until we have to.
So I will fill out the paperwork and get that in tomorrow, and then I will request that he come to a January meeting or earlier.
I'm not sure if they'll have their budget much sooner than that either, too. So, I mean,
I would
Yeah.
hate for him to come present at the one where we then have to vote. I mean, that's going to be one long board meeting.
we were thinking of having the discussion on the first meeting in January, and then if we needed to vote, we could do it at the second one before
So have him
February.
at the first.
If we feel like it's helpful to have him there, I don't know, we can have a conversation with him and make that call.
Yeah, or we could possibly have it at the December meeting, but we can decide that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
There's not a lot on there. Okay, policy.
No, wait,
Oh, yeah. What?
weren't we going to,
Oh, the other.
weren't we going to talk about what, I wanted to say my spiel about what I.
Oh, yes, about the
conference.
MSMA, sorry.
Yeah.
I went right up with the
And
resolutions.
I know we spent a long time on that, so I won't go into it as much as I wanted to, but I made notes and everything. First of all, I got this T-shirt. And
We all
everyone
did.
else did too.
Some of us
Nobody
are
else wore it.
slackers.
This was, I wanted to talk about it because I'm really glad that I went. I didn't get to go to every session, obviously, but I didn't even get to go to both of the full days, but I've marked the dates for next year. It was really eye-opening to be in a room full of administrators, superintendents, board members, just to better understand the challenges that education is under. So I very much encourage people to go next year, and the dates next year are October 24th and 25th. I think it's great learning for us as board members. And I just wanted to highlight what I went to, and I get a meeting on your calendar for next week, Becky, so that I can go over some of my notes with you. But I went to something, Becky talked to you last time about Jamie Vollmer, who was the speaker, and he talked about student success in the age of rising expectations. And I would say the main thrust of that presentation was about how there's this very popular narrative in our American culture that education is failing, when actually all evidence to the contrary. So we have a lot of work ahead of us to do exactly what we've already charged ourselves with in this year, which is to communicate and to bridge that gap of understanding between ourselves and our schools and the community. So that was really great. I also went to a presentation on marketing ideas from the private sector. The upshot of that for me was that I think we need a social media strategy, which I'm sure everyone's going to be really excited about. I went to a presentation on suicide risk, it's a growing risk among students, especially those ages 15 to 19. Went to presentation on staff and student boundaries. It was very interesting. And the last one I went to was about LGBTQ in schools and the transition to a non-binary world. And I forget the name of the principal, but you introduced me to him previously, Becky.
Eben Shaw.
Yes, and Lewiston? Levitt. He was really a wonderful speaker, and there was an attorney from that area as well who spoke. And I think people tend to think that the issues around transitioning to a non-binary world, we sort of think it's still an anomaly, and it's not. It's actually been going on in our schools for quite a long time, and he was just great about talking about how they walk through these processes with their students, and how legally we are obligated to accommodate any child who asks for any accommodation. They're already covered. So just wanted to highlight this also publicly, because there can be a question sometimes around, well, what about the parents? What do the parents think? And actually, it doesn't matter legally whether a parent is supportive of their child who's going through something like this. We are legally obligated to accommodate any child who makes a request for accommodation. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And like I said, I'll share more of my thoughts around that with Becky next week.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm sorry I almost jumped right over that. Every year I learn something new. I've gone to at least one day of every year that I've been on the board, I think, and whether it's the delegate assembly, even if you can't vote, you can go and listen, although it's really hard for me not to talk and just sit in the back and listen. It's good for me, though. But yeah, just the different, the stuff on special ed, and I went to one on regionalization, and they're all really, really good. They do a really nice job with that. So if anyone ever has the opportunity in their schedule to go, highly recommend it. So maybe not higher than being in Italy. Maybe I wouldn't move that trip. So if you were afraid you couldn't ask me to join you next year because of I might miss it for that. Okay. Any other board comments, committee reports?
I'm sorry, I just make this really quick. I just wanted to talk about Challenge Day, which the freshman class just went through at the high school, which is empathy training. No one's here anymore, but if anyone's watching, but it's an amazing program that now the last 4 freshman classes have gone through, and it's a program that we may not get to have them come back because our freshman class is too large for them to accommodate. And so Jen Gulko and Dee Dee Bunnell had to really fight for this. But I'm very supportive of this kind of training in our schools. I've been part of it the last 4 years. It's huge, and it's really needed, like what I just highlighted around suicide risk and lack of empathy and understanding, and especially in our culture today where there's so much divisiveness. It's so important to have these kinds of programs in our schools. So I wanted to also just thank Jen Gulko for her work making sure that it happened this year, and thank Dee Dee Bunnell, who worked really hard to make it happen, and thank our parent volunteers who came in and spent the day with the freshman class.
Okay. Anybody else? Now we'll move on to policy. I thought we were moving policy to the top of the agenda. How did that get moved back to the end again? I guess it's ahead of unfinished and new business. We just don't have any.
I had the same thought. Typically, it's not on this particular meeting of the month. I think we put it here because we're looking forward at the next meeting and trying to, these aren't really hot topic ones. They're the second reads only.
Gotcha.
So I think we're trying to be efficient with time.
But it is sort of funny that we have no unfinished business or new business, and
Yes.
it's still 9:18.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because it is a second read, unless you have questions, I think we can.
I did want to mention something about one policy,
Okay.
though. Okay. And really, this came out of the MSMA conference, one of the sessions that I had gone to with Peter Femley from Drummond Woodsum. And it was about, he brought the board, the participation, public participation topic up at the session. And of note, he mentioned that you should, his advice, for what it's worth and for whatever you want to discuss or not, you may not decide to do anything different with this policy, was to stick to agenda items only in public comments. And he gave a couple of reasons why, so I just thought I'd share those with you. One of the things, he says it's the safest ground because otherwise if you shut down public comments, like they're starting to talk about whatever it is, and if you shut them down, you're subject to First Amendment violations. So that's one, because he's litigation with that particular topic. And then if you allow a public comment that is a positive about, let's say, a person that works or an employee, then you're also inviting negative comments to be shared. So those were the two talking points that he talked about, and I thought I had a duty to share that with you because that was his recommendation as a lawyer. So that would impact the first policy with where it says time permitting, that underlined part, members of the community may comment on other school-related matters. Other than that, I have no comments about any of the rest of the policy or the other three policies.
Can I guess what Maddie's going to say? Go.
I appreciate lawyers. It's their job to keep us safe, and it's important that we listen to them, and I've worked with lawyers a lot in my previous career. That said, if we always did everything that they suggested, we would have a very safe, risk-averse culture.
Boring.
And it would be boring, and it would be, it would not be the kind of transparent and inclusive and welcoming and connected to the community culture that I, for one, think we should aspire to. So I would propose we keep it as is.
I agree, and my reasons are different. I don't see us ever shutting anyone down and violating their First Amendment. They have 3 minutes, and they can use those 3 minutes, so we're not going to shut them down because we have a rule that says 3 minutes is your limit. And as far as talking about personnel, we can say up front, you're invited to speak 2 items on the agenda. If you want to speak about something that's not on the agenda, be aware that you cannot say anything that has anything to do with personnel.
I feel like that's already in here, isn't it? That they can't talk about personnel? No?
I don't think so.
Hmm.
So I just wanted you to have that discussion, right? I'm just presenting because I thought the timing of it was uncanny.
Yeah, no
Well,
complaints
thank
or
you for sharing.
allegations will be allowed at board meetings concerning any person employed by the school system or against particular students. So, I mean, I think you can,
Covered there.
right, I mean, I don't know, maybe that policy wouldn't hold up in court. But I don't know, I feel similar to Maddie in that I don't think, I'm not sure what people's avenue is if they want to, if we say it's not here, then where is it? I mean, is there like a comment box or, I mean, yeah, I mean, right, exactly. I do think we should have like a comment box on our website where people could fire off, because I think people would do that. I mean, we have it at work. What? Yeah, there you go. No, we don't want it public in the Facebook group. But yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate their input. And I think you mentioned it at the conference that they had said that. And even at that point, I just appreciate their comments, but I kind of like what we've put together here. So.
Okay.
All right, so that doesn't result in any change at this point. So I would take, I'll read it. A motion for consideration and approval for the following policies, second read: BEDH, IJNDB, IJNDBR, and IJNDC. Maddie, second from Kate. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Which way you voting, Kate? You did? Okay, I didn't see your hand. I was looking at hands up. Okay. So then I would take a motion to adjourn. Mara? Vale's a second. Oh, what? Hold on.
Did you include this one in your motion?
What's that?
Did you include IJNDC in your
Yes.
motion?
Yeah, that was the last one.
Oh, okay, I only heard
Yeah.
R.
No, I did one more after R. Yeah. All those in favor? Adjourn. You're in favor, don't worry, Jen. Okay, thank you.